Hi folks, you're with Tacitus today, your pushback channel. Thank you for joining this audio live stream. Please listen to this presentation as you would a radio broadcast. In this essay, I'd like to talk about something that was raised by President Trump, which is conceptually at least an idea of resurrecting the penal colony. Now, as I understand it, at least what President Trump was talking about was the worst of the worst criminals, the repeat, not only repeat offenders, but they repeat the crimes, the heinous crimes, murder and beating people to death, or whatever, all these sorts of things, serious crimes. And what do you do with those people? They have no fear of going back to prison. And when their lives have been suspended to a point where they're no longer part of society, they can't hold down a job, they've got no concept of what that is, they have to live on the street and so on and so forth, then maybe they're drug addicts as well, but prison is the only place where they can have structure and order in their lives. The meals provided, 3 meals a day. Now, it may not be the nicest place to hang out, but at least they know plenty of people there. It's like a community that they can hang around with of known people, and they get housed and fed and given medical attention at the taxpayer expense. So it's a better deal by far than anything they could get outside of the prison. So, are these hardened criminals, malicious hardened criminals, or people that have no other concept of how to exist day to day? It almost doesn't matter, I guess, but the point is what you do with people like that. Now, societies have been wrestling with this problem for all time. It's not as if it's a new problem that appeared yesterday or the day before. And many people of very good intention have tried to apply themselves, and of superior intellect, have tried to apply themselves to solving the problem, believing that, I've got the solution to this. But it never ends up working out, even if it does work out well in the beginning, or passably well in the beginning. The concept of it becomes subverted and politicized and perverted and used by people of evil intent, then get hold of it and in sinister ways undermine the very initial concept, turn it into a fraudulent exercise. And this also has happened throughout time. So I'll talk a little bit about this and see where it goes. Now, for example, let's suppose that there's plenty of African islands that could be used, or places in Africa, for example, Africa, or past South America, so where the US could, say, buy a plot of land and operate a prison there. And then the worst offenders could be sent to those prisons. And given the cost of living there and the cost of everything there is much less than what might be $50,000 a year to maintain a prisoner in the United States, could be done for, say, $10,000 a year. But there'll be a number of differences in service delivery. Quality of food and medical care and so on will be different. But nonetheless, could it in theory be done? Well, yeah. And let's suppose that they've got to maintain, give or take, got to maintain US standards of humanity. Then it wouldn't be long for somebody would come along and say, well, look how expensive that is. We've got to cut back on these benefits. They're hardened criminals after all. Then you would get that slippage. Then there would be, well, what are those people sitting around there doing nothing? Why can't we put them to work? Then they would become cheap wage slaves in effect, and then that would be there. Why should we be keeping these people alive? They're bad, evil people. We'd be better if they went around and just killing them all, sort of take them out back and shooting them. That's sort of still a bridge too far. So why don't we just starve them to death, or why don't we release a virus? And before you know it, it's all gone out of control, and the original purpose and intent has been lost, or again subverted by those with varying degrees of sinister intent. One of the people in there is a murderer of little girls dressed in pink, And some firebrand politician is going to say, hey, why don't we do this and that? And you go, yeah, whoa. So it can all get out of control pretty quickly. And again, the original intent or purpose can be lost. Now, we even see this with, say, the British had an idea, and this was something that sort of, say, from around or even earlier than this, but the 7 Years' War, so the 1750s, began even going earlier, the idea that the most difficult elements of the population, if you send them off to another, like an offshore prison, whether it be in North America or Australia, Australia being known as founded as a penal colony, rather than initially an agricultural colony, which it quickly and subsequently became. What do you do with your intractable prisoners? The multiple murderers and so on. It's expensive to put them in prisons. It's expensive to build prisons. So why not just send them off somewhere else where they won't be a problem? Now, and there was some of that going on in North America and other British colonies. But then it turned into, it quickly mutates. For example, in Australia, once it was determined that Australia could be a viable colony in terms of, again, agricultural production, later running sheep and all sorts of other, gold was discovered later, and it was found out to be potentially at least a land of opportunity. They hadn't realised sort of quite how big Australia was and how much arable land there was and how suitable it was for large-scale agricultural production. So, that quickly came along in the 1800s. Now, the first penal colony fleet arrived in Australia in 1788, and the idea that it would be a self-sufficient prison, so you would grow enough food to feed the prisoners, all that sort of stuff. But the governors quickly worked out, well, gee, we need labour to do things here. We need people of expertise in various elements of farming, pig farming, people of expertise in irrigation and agriculture, people of expertise in stonemasonry and building and carpentry and goodness knows what. So the demand came back that actually we can make a real go. This doesn't have to be just a prison. We can make a real go of this and turn this into a productive, colony in a number of ways. So then the word came back to England. So, if someone gets arrested for charged with a crime and they happen to have skills that could be used in the colony, then in Australia, or Botany Bay or Old Sydney Town, as it was called back then, then, hey, give them a prison term and send them off to Australia. So there was, say, I don't know, a stonemason got charged with something, then they could, you can have 10 years in prison here, or you can have 20 years in prison here, or you can have 7 years in the colonies. Now, bear in mind that the people were terrified of being sent to the colonies. It was equivalent of being sent to some terrible place in the middle of nowhere. But the reality was, when they got to Australia, they would have a better diet, a better lifestyle, they'd be healthier, and if they had any skills at all, they'd be put to work straight away. The colony needed skilled workers, whether they be stonemasons or carpenters or experienced fishermen, or didn't matter. But if they had any sort of skills, they were put to work straight away. So the idea they'd be languishing in some sort of damp, cold cell in England or Britain, no, they were out there in the fresh air again with a good diet and working, and so they had a very good, in the overall scheme of things, a good standard of living. Some at the end of their term chose to go back to England, but many chose to stay when they realised, hey, this is not a bad gig. So in this instance, or in the instance of Australia at least, the idea of a penal colony where people just sat in prison wasn't on. Now, there were people that committed crimes, they were just hardened criminals. So Australia had the interesting sort of development where they created penal colonies for the penal colonies. So they had Sydney was ostensibly a penal colony, but it very quickly turned into an outdoor working environment. I mean, to even call it a prison was a stretch. But there were criminals who were still committing murder and so on. So they created a penal colony for the penal colony in various other places, such as Norfolk Island, which is an island off the coast of Australia, or Hobart in Tasmania. That's an island off the southern coast of the Australian mainland, and so these penal colonies, which themselves turned into viable economic colonies within a fairly short space of time, really. So, but the point I'm trying to make here is that the criminals, hardened criminals, weren't really wanted in Australia once it became a economically viable sort of colony, and instead people with skills. So they were randomly arrested. Well, not randomly, maybe that's a stretch, but they were certainly on the hunt for grabbing people for quite minor offences. Maybe they forged a letter or something like this and go, to the colonies for you, because the guy just happened to be a carpenter or something like that. In other cases, they'd be, say, law clerks that had fallen on stony times and had done something. Maybe they'd taken a couple of bucks out of the petty cash tin at the law practice, and they would get sent off because they needed people with legal expertise in Australia, and or again, old Sydney town as they called it at the time. So off they went and to the colonies. And again, they the supposed penal colonies, even from, say, the early 1800s, or maybe a little bit longer, say 1810 onwards. So again, the first fleet in Australia, in Sydney, arrives in 1788, and by 1810, so 20 odd years later, it's already not really a penal colony anymore. Sure, convicts are being sent, but they're being put to work straight away. I mean, they're given somewhere to stay, and again, if they've got any skills, they become quite serious, upstanding members of the community, really. And some of the early architects and builders and carpenters, stonemasons, people of considerable skills, artisan type skills back in the day, they were put to work immediately and became, Francis Greenway as an example, became really model citizens, I suppose you'd call them, the colonies. So, but again, I'm talking more about the subversion of the legal process, simply to send skilled people out because that's what was needed, whereas originally it was a penal colony to send out the most intractable prisoners. But the most intractable prisoners weren't really any use in the colony. Some were, but many were just intractable, beings that no society wants or needs or will be any use. Maybe people suffering, mental health issues or something like that. So they were the ones, they were sent to Australia as convicts, and then they were rearrested once they got into the Australia, and then sent to a convict settlement within the convict settlement. That was how insane, if you like, the logic of it was in the day. Now, if we look at, say, the penal colonies of the French Empire, of which Devil's Island, Papillon, and all that sort of stuff, there's a movie with Steve McQueen in. This began again as a penal colony concept, but very quickly the French decided, well, two things. They decided, can we make this is in French Guiana here, can we make this in the north coast of South America? So if you sort of look at heading west from or east from Venezuela, if you go far enough, you'll sort of go into French Guiana. Now, the two things happened. It began as a penal colony concept, then two things happened. The French government decided, hey, we might be able to make a go of this and turn this into a viable piece of France in South America, and have a viable colony, a viable economy. And but we need labour. It's a harsh climate out there, malaria and goodness knows what. there's jungle everywhere you look, and so we need lots of labour to clear the forests and start the farms and build the buildings and build the roads and so on. So they needed labour out there, but they just couldn't find enough convicts to be able to send there that could do the work. Now, there was just a shortage of convicts. That was as simple as that. Now, on top of that, the death rate from malaria and various tropical diseases of people who were being grabbed from French towns, Paris and wherever, they were dying. Like one and two were dying, and in some cases, if there was a big malaria outbreak, as many as 3 and 4 would die. I mean, it was epic. So there was a constant and intense demand for more convicts to be put into the mincing machine to provide more labour and so on. So the French then had to up the ante. There just simply weren't enough criminals around, so they decided to include political prisoners in the. This was a different breed. These weren't the criminals sort of on the street, trying to steal your wallet or your purse or something. Political prisoners were different. They were typically at least, educated and on a relative basis, sophisticated people, and people who again, political prisoners are ones that the elites just don't like, rather than people who've committed a crime. And you can put folks like Dreyfus and various other people into that category. And they were being sent out to French Guiana and again, Devil's Island and so on. Now, it's meant to be self-sufficient, Devil's Island, and fishing and growing some crops, that sort of thing, which it largely was. But again, the corruption of the purpose is what occurred here. Now, we could look at the same thing, the Russian gulags, where political prisoners became by far and away the majority of prisoners that were there, not actual criminals. And in fact, criminals were considered to be, who cares? This is during the Soviet era, whereas people who had the wrong thoughts were considered to be the real criminals, not the actual criminals. We see that in the West today. I mean, look at the UK, where people have the wrong opinions. Right, they're Nazis. Whereas people actually commit the real crimes. They're just misguided, misunderstood people. I mean, and this is really the communist, or it's the attitude and view that ideological government always has. And so the political prisoners being sent over this, if you don't agree with us, we're going to send you to that penal colony. So penal colonies in every form, whether they start off as a good idea, or rather they become subverted, and eventually they turn into a place where political prisoners are sent, and or simply people with skills that are needed as labourers. So they become labouring camps or political prisoner camps. Consider the January 6th farce in the United States, where the globalist-controlled Democrats decided to invent a crime that hadn't occurred and then throw people in prison for it, trying to dress it up as insurrection and Nazis. And imagine that those people in control of a situation where there were penal colonies, or say a prisoner set up in Africa. Then how long will it be before a globalist politics? Well, look, that's unfair, because more black people are being sent to prison than white, but we have to send straight white Christian males to that prison because we want equity and so on. And how long would it be before that happens? So once you go down this road, which sounds good and worthwhile and sensible, even practical in many ways at the beginning, always consider when it's in the hands of sinister people, it will be subverted, and typically horribly so. You've been a Tacitus today, your pushback channel. Thank you for listening.